Back in the summer of 2018, I went to a program in Hotel Dieu Grace Hospital called Center for Digital Dependency. At the time, I was completely addicted to the computer and the phone, constantly gaming, constantly doing things online. I couldn't separate myself from it. But I had been failing my college courses, so I decided I need to get rid of this and focus, be able to somehow detach myself. So I went there, and there were three others with me, and the first thing was we made a bet of who would break first with withdrawal in the rehab program, residential program. After about a week, I started breaking rather. I needed to connect with something, anything. I needed to do anything. And then I found out that one of the other residents had brought a game called Magic the Gathering with him, a card game. I became addicted to it, of course, but all four of us started playing, and then it became less about the game and more about the conversation, the bonding, the companionship, the connections, and within a week we all became very good friends based off of that. And even after they took away the game, we were still excellent friends, talking. Withdrawal was, for us, was actually no longer much of a problem anymore, because at the time, I didn't really understand why, but we just had so much fun just speaking with each other. I was actually happy for the first time in years. After the program ended and we went our separate ways, I thought that with everything I learned, everything would be okay after I came back, but within a week, everything went back to the way it was before. Even now, it's mostly the same it was back then. So I kept on asking myself, why is this happening? Why did I go back to square one? Why can I not keep myself away from the computer? Why am I always going towards it and submitting to it? And it turns out that the answer was simple. I was no longer connected to anyone. I no longer had my connections with my three new friends. They'd left to go home. And the thing about me is I don't really have any friends outside of my house. Just my parents, no siblings. I don't really have anyone to connect to aside from the computer. With the computer, you can do anything. You can bond with it. It's the perfect friend. So I started thinking, why is it that this is happening? Why can I not detach myself? Why can I not connect with anyone else? But then I started reading a ton and watching TED Talks about addiction, and I came to the conclusion everything that we know about addiction is wrong, or rather almost everything. So let's start with what we think we know, and I'll use drugs as an example. Let's say you, for the next few weeks, decided to use heroin 3 times a day, every day. Imagine if you did that. What would happen? Now, the traditional story is that drugs have chemical hooks in them. Specifically heroin, also very addictive. It has a chemical hook in it, so to speak, and then after a few times of using it, your body will become dependent and you can't stop. So that's what's supposed to happen, yes? Well, actually, the thing that I found interesting is that I was listening to a TED Talk, and the guy was saying that if you've ever gone to the hospital and you've had to have surgery or a bone replacement or anything like that, and they give you painkillers, the painkiller that they give you is called dopamine, which is heroin, except much better heroin, medically pure heroin, the real stuff. So that means after about 2 weeks of being on that, you should become addicted. But most people it doesn't really happen. You don't go in and you come out a junkie. So why is that? Well, another example is during the Vietnam War, 20% of all American troops were using tons and tons of heroin and drugs. And at the time, America was terrified that when those soldiers came back, they would have a gigantic addict problem. So after the war was over, the soldiers were followed home, and they did a detailed study. The government did. But then they found something shocking. 95% of the soldiers who had been using heroin just stopped. When they got home, they just stopped. They didn't go into withdrawal. They didn't have problems. They didn't become junkies. Nothing. Which doesn't make sense. There's chemical hooks. If there's chemical hooks, why is it that such a huge amount of them didn't become addicts? So, Then, in one of the TED Talks that I was watching, this guy talked about this professor who proposed, what if addiction is not about chemical hooks? What if it is about your cage, your environment that you are in? He proposed, maybe we shouldn't call it addiction, we should call it bonding. All humans have a natural need to bond, and when we're healthy and happy, we'll bond and connect with each other, just like I did in the hospital. It started off with a game, but I started bonding and connecting with the three guys, and I felt happy. I was getting tons of dopamine in my head, being happy all the time that I was friends with people for the first time in a while. But for other people, the reason why addiction happens is that you can't connect. Whether it's because you're isolated, traumatized, or just nobody cares about you, you will bond with something, whether that it could be pornography, gambling, in my case it was computer and technology, it could be drugs, but you will bond and connect with the first thing that gives you relief, because that's in our nature. We want to bond with something, anything. So I think the core thing that I'm trying to get across is that it's not really about chemical hooks, or it's not really about you're just addicted, you need to stop. It's about you have to look at your environment. You have to find out why is it that you are constantly going towards your addiction. And usually it's because you're isolated. You don't have anyone else to bond with you. You don't have friends that you enjoy the company of. So the thing that people need to do with addicts is that you have to reconnect them, connect them with other people. Because the opposite of addiction is in fact connection. Addiction is isolation. So that's the core message. You have to, with addicts, you have to take them, love them, tell them you care about them, connect. And then they won't see a reason to go at their addiction anymore. Because once they're connected, they won't want to go back. Thank you for your time. This has been my TED Talk.